What's up, friends? Thought of the day number 31. Today we're going to talk about zone 2 as a percentage of FTP. Obviously we're going to define FTP, try to give an updated definition, or at least the few definitions that currently exist, so that we all speak the same language, and then talk about calibrating your low intensity training based on that FTP. But first, I have just a short little rant here. I don't rant very often. I'm not a ranty person. I got a comment yesterday or a couple days ago. Somebody said, "You're not living up to your promise of making more English content." I think I might be paraphrasing slightly, but I think it was something like that. Now, yes, I did say that I was going to make an effort to make more English content. And if you look over the last month, I haven't done any thought of the day. I haven't done any in French or in English. However, I have done a bunch of open conversations. And some of those conversations I could have gotten paid for as consultations. But I decided, because it is one of my goals to make more English content, to simply record those exchanges, have them for free, quote unquote, and share them with you guys. And if you go back on my channel, there's, I think, hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of free content. And it just rubs me the wrong way when someone, and I know it's only one person, and I know the vast majority of you are grateful and thankful, and you tell me that through the comments. And if you don't, please do tell me that in the comments. So I'm not just singling out that person or that one comment, but I think it's important to understand that at this point in time, I make about $200 a month off of all my YouTube content. That's dozens of hours of free content per month that I've been putting out for the last 3 years. And I don't do that for the money, obviously. Okay, I do other things on the side. I coach, I test, I program, I consult. I do many things. Creating content at this point is not what pays the bills. I do it because I love it. I do it because I feel like sharing is the way forward, because I learn while sharing, and I have learned through other people sharing with me. And this is why I do it. And like I said, it just stood out to me that someone would take their time to leave, I guess it's not a negative comment, it's just an appreciative comment. And I just don't like that very much. So I just thought I would take a second to, I thought I would take a second to voice that perspective. That being said, no hard feelings. And yes, I'm going to keep doing some English content. A little update on that, by the way. In a couple days, on Tuesday, I am taking off. I'm leaving or driving down to the south of France to spend 3-4 days with Sam Laidlow and a team of coaches and athletes for a testing/training camp in triathlon, which I'm so excited for that. It's going to be an amazing experience, an amazing opportunity to learn. Andrew Sellers, Luke Way, two people that I look up to, that I've learned from a lot coming from Canada for this camp. And I'm looking forward to making some, again, free content for this channel for you guys around everything that we're going to do on those few days of testing, of training, of exchanging. It's going to be a fantastic experience. So that's something I hadn't mentioned in English yet. So here you go. That's happening next week. Pretty stoked. So here's a rant. Here's a great piece of news. Now let's talk about FTP in zone 2. All right, FTP. How do we define it? Originally, it was defined as your 60-minute power, if we keep it simple. Okay. Then people decided 60 minutes was too long and too painful. Let's find a shorter version. Okay, let's do a 5-minute all-out-ish effort, a short break, and then a 20-minute effort, all-out-ish. and then take 95% of that 20 minute. And for those who are familiar with the critical power model, after that 5 minute all out ish effort, you've expended all of your W prime or most of it. So when you go into your 20 minute effort, technically all you can hold is critical power. I know it's not exactly the same as a metabolic steady state, but we'll take them as close equivalents in this conversation. So you've expended your whole W prime, or that work capacity that you have above second threshold, let's call it. And now you go into your 20 minute and all you can do is essentially ride at threshold. And then you take your 95% to be just a little bit conservative, and you have a good estimate of your second threshold, okay? That was the second best option after the 60 minute power. And now people have forgotten about the 5 minute and then they go into a 20 minute max effort and take 95% of that. So that's usually how FTP is used currently, which I think overestimates significantly your 40 to 60 minute power. And so ideally you would take 85% of your 20 minute max effort power as your second threshold. Okay, that's what I would do. 85 to 90%, no more than that. For elite cyclists, 86% from memory, 86% of their 20 minute power is going to give you their 60 minute power. So if that's what elite cyclists can do, most people are probably below that. So you should maybe take 80, but then I'm going to keep going down, and then you're going to stop listening to the channel because I'm telling you to go slower. So yeah, 85 to 90% of your 20 minute power, that's a good estimate, okay? So now that we have an FTP value, which is supposed to give us an idea, an estimation of threshold 2 of that transition point between an elevated but steady internal state, stable internal state, transitioning into the severe domain, which is inherently unstable from a metabolic standpoint. This is why we tend towards high lactate values quickly. That's why we trend towards VO2 max. So we have a loss of internal homeostasis. And now we have that transition point. How can we do to calculate zone 2 as a percentage of this? Well, that becomes, ooh, look at that. Look at this little guy. Hey, buddy, are you okay? Let's put him on the side. He's still alive. There you go. That's a pretty little frog. All right, we saved a frog today, guys. Thank you for your help with that. So where was I? Percents of FTP as zone 2. So what is zone 2? Again, depending on who you listen to, it's going to be slightly different. I hope you can hear the birds. It's amazing in this forest. They're very loud. It is very nice. Depends how you define it, okay? I look at zone 2 as 2 to 3 out of 10. Metabolic steady state at the cellular or muscular level, which means that if we look at lactate, we're going to have very low levels of lactate, maybe even lower than resting levels. So it's essentially the intensity that's just before the first upward inflection in lactate concentration in the blood, as measured through a step test, for example. I know some see zone 2 as kind of straddling that first inflection in lactate. I know some that see zone 2 as being just above that first inflection in lactate. So just to be clear, I define it as being just underneath the first upward inflection in lactate concentration in the blood. Right or wrong, I don't know. This is how I use it, and it works quite well for me. So what we want, if we want to take a percentage of FTP to find our zone 2 power, is going to be to find that higher limit of zone 2, right? That transition between the moderate and the heavy domain, or the transition between zone 2 and zone 3 in the model that I've just described here. And the difficulty with this is that this is going to be quite variable from one person to the next, because depending on how much low intensity training you've done, volume wise and frequency wise over the last 3 to 12 months, let's say, well, that percentage is going to be vastly different. I've measured probably upwards of 150 different athletes so far. Some elite level athletes, some beginner level or even sedentary people. And what I've found as a range in terms of the percentage of FTP or threshold 2 at that first inflection in lactate is quite drastic. And so I wouldn't actually recommend that you use a percentage of FTP to determine your zone 2. You can use, so what I've done when I have to estimate it, what I do is I look at how much low intensity training that the person has been doing weekly over the last months. And if it's less than an hour per week, then I'll use a very conservative measure of 55% of FTP as the transition between zone 2 and zone 3. Maybe sometimes 57%. And then for someone who's got, say, 2 to 3 hours of low intensity training per week consistently, well calibrated low intensity, because obviously if you're doing it too high, then it's not actually low intensity, even though you think it is. Then I might go up to 62%, 65%. And then for people that have been doing consistently 4, 5 or plus hours of low intensity training for months, well-trained endurance athletes, let's call it, then in that case, I might go 70 or 72% of that FTP for the upper boundary of zone 2. And then, but that, again, that remains a rough, it's math, okay? We're applying math. And so I'm of the opinion at this point that there's 2 good options when it comes to calibrating your low intensity training. One of them is a test, whether it's a lactate test, whether it's a gas exchange test, measuring your physiology. That is one option, and it is the preferred option. I won't say the best, but it's the preferred option if you have access to it. So if you have the means of testing yourself, or if you can access a lab, or if your coach can do that for you, these are all preferred options. The second best, in my opinion, is to work by feel. And everybody's going to throw their arms up in the air and hands up in the air and say, yeah, but that's subjective. It's not objective. We want metrics. We want numbers. We want measures. At the end of the day, your perception is just as important as your physiology, okay? Go back and watch Steven Seiler's work. You'll see that there's a triad, the 3 Ps: performance, physiology, perception. And all 3 of them are important to quantify what's going on during training in general. And you don't have a complete picture unless you have all 3. And obviously 2 is better than only 1. So you should never just rely on one thing and say, this is what my physiology says, so I'm just gonna do that. And even if I haven't slept, I'm stressed at work, I'm having issues personally, and I just got out of a big sickness, but I'm still gonna ride my watts because my lactate said that this is what I had to be at, and this is just what I'm gonna do because I just need to toughen up and I just need to do the work. Well, no, this is not how it works. Read Alex Hutchinson's book, Endure, and you will see throughout this book that perception is one of the most important factors in elite performance or performance in general, because it is going to be the differentiating factor between what you could do and what you actually do. Realizing your true potential goes through the psychological aspect of performance, because this is how you manifest it. And so you can't just put it aside and say it's subjective and it doesn't matter. It's, in my opinion, probably one of the most important parts of it. We're just numb to ourselves and we don't know how to listen to our bodies. And there's a quote by Niels van der Poel If you don't know who he is, go watch the Beijing Olympics from a year ago. Wow, it's already a year ago. That's crazy. Go watch the Beijing Olympics in speed skating, 5,000, 10,000 meters, gold medal, double world record. And in his training manifesto, training manual that he shared, he says you have to, and I probably paraphrasing here, he says you have to hear your body whisper at you so you don't have to listen to it scream. And this is extremely important. We have to learn how to listen to our bodies. And that was just a long-winded way of saying that perception is just as important as physiology. And if you don't have access to physiological metrics, then perception is a very good way to calibrate your low intensity, despite its lack of accuracy. But you have to listen to yourself. So that zone 2 intensity for me would be most of the time 2 to 3 out of 10. It should be very easy, okay? And this is where you're gonna do most of your volume. So going back to that percentage talk from before, I gave you 55, 57%, 60%, 70% of FTP as being top of zone 2. Again, this is all math and this is vastly suboptimal, and I would not recommend using this. I would recommend either a lactate test or a gas exchange test or Moxie test, whatever you want to do to find those inflection points, that change in internal state. Or I would use your perception and just work by feel and just pay attention to how you feel, pay attention to your heart rate. If you go on an hour ride, if we're talking bike, and your heart is nice and steady from minute 10 to minute 60, so give 10 minutes for the heart rate to rise a bit. If you have a nice flat heart rate trend from minute 10 to minute 60, then you're probably pretty good. If you see a rise in heart rate in that time by 5 beats or more, you're probably a little too high. And you'll probably feel it in the legs as well, right? Just a little bit of tingle in the legs, nothing crazy, probably not even breathing hard at that point at all. But just a little bit of load, right? But in general, you would want to do most of your low intensity training at a 2 to 3 out of 10. So very easy intensity. So that would be, maybe call it bottom or middle of zone 2. What I use as a more precise value for the people that I've tested or that I work with directly is I look at that first lactate threshold, and then the upper limit for most of the low intensity work is 90% of that. So if I measure someone's lactate threshold 1 at 150 watts, which is pretty common for the CrossFitters that I work with, for example, then they would do most of their work below 135. If we're talking watts, we can look at their heart rate as well, corresponding heart rate on the test. But again, that's going to vary a lot day to day. So we have to look at all three, okay? Watts, physiology, and perception. So we can auto-regulate training on a day-to-day basis and optimize the response of the body. So below 90% of that first threshold, probably between 75 and 90% is where most of the volume is going to happen for elite athletes, elite endurance athletes, cyclists, triathletes, runners. That's going to probably go down quite a bit, because for someone with, I don't know, take a pro cyclist with a threshold 1 at 320 watts. If we take 10% off of this, that's 290 watts. That's still very taxing. So they're probably going to do most of their volume at 260, 250 or below, okay? So I would say that in general, as a rule of thumb, the higher level you are, the farther away from that first inflection point, from that first threshold, you're going to do your low intensity training. Now, once in a while, and the way that I quantify that to put some numbers on it is in about 1 out of 5 sessions. So every 5th session, as a big rule of thumb, okay? It's not perfect, but it's a model. It's useful in that case. Every 5th session, you might want to go on that transition, okay? At 110% of the power at threshold 1. Because you also want to, you don't want to just work all the way down and nowhere else. So sometimes you got to go there. And obviously you got to do your tempos, you got to do your thresholds, you got to do your VO2s, you got to do your sprints, you got to do all this stuff you got to do to stimulate on the high intensity end of things at the right time, for the right reason, with the right dose, with the right progression. Okay, it's not all about zone 2. You can't just do that and become the best, unless you have a 3-year plan like Niels van der Poel, and then you can do 40 hours of zone 2 training per week for weeks on end. No, it's not true. That was kind of his peak weeks, but he was probably around 25 to 30, 35 hours for an extended period of time there. Yeah, so again, I would probably favor RPE, rating of perceived exertion, over a percentage of FTP for that zone 2 training if you don't have any physiological data that you've measured. I think that's it. I think I've kind of gone around, right? I've kind of gone around. So here you go. Don't use percentage of FTP for your zone 2 training. That's my that's the conclusion of this whole rigmarole that I went through. But at least I hope that you better understand what FTP means and how it works, and how you can optimize your training, your low intensity training, based on either your perception or your physiology, or both, ideally. That was it. Make sure you leave me a like, drop me a comment below if you appreciate that English content, and I'll see you in the next video.